Even going to record another video today, but I made a point earlier about Jacob and Rachel, and I feel like I need to expand on it. This story has been so idolized by the church to be a beautiful love story about how this man worked for the woman he loved for 14 years. However, I feel as though we've made a grave mistake, right? If you look into just the history of Jacob's family, from the very get-go, the two brothers are put against each other because of their parents' favoritism one towards the other, right? So Esau and Jacob are constantly at odds. There's constantly this division. And there's a prophecy given to the mother that the younger one will be the head over the older child, which is not the way that things were supposed to be operating in God's kingdom. However, because the mother hears that prophecy, she works to ensure that it comes to being by having Jacob lie to his father and bless him over his brother Esau. And Jacob tricks his brother into selling his birthright to him. And there's all this trickery and all of these lies that occur. Forward, Jacob's on the run because he's scared that his brother Esau is going to come after him because he stole his birthright. And while he's on the run, he sees this woman. It's Rachel. And he's like, oh, I gotta have her. So he asks Lebanon, what do I have to do? And he tells him, well, work for me for the next 7 years, and then I'll give you my daughter. Okay, bet. So he works for Rachel for the next 7 years, right? Or so he believes. And Lebanon ends up tricking him into marrying Leah. Why? Well, it was custom back then for the first daughter to be married off first. It was disrespectful to marry the younger daughter off before the older daughter got married. And so that's why Lebanon does this. However, even after sleeping with Leah and, accepting his responsibility as Leah's husband, he neglects this woman. He completely pushes her aside and works for another 7 years for Rachel. And it tells us in the scripture that, but for him, it seemed but minutes. And we think, wow, what a beautiful love story. And we forget that this is a man who is completely neglecting this wife that he already has. And also with that, the children that she is conceiving and giving to him. And his first child born is Judah. And Judah ends up being the line in which the lineage of Jesus Christ comes from. This is the child of promise. Leah was the wife that brought forth the child of promise. And Rachel has a lot of struggles with being able to conceive. In fact, she does the same thing that Sarah does at one point and actually gives her husband her concubine, which we know is not something that Jesus is a fan of. Now, I say Jesus, but you know what I mean. God, same person. Anywho, she does the very thing that God despises and gives her concubine to Jacob in order to have children for her on her behalf. But one of the things that we forget and neglect to think about when it comes to this story is the fact that God opens and closes the womb. And it talks about in the Old Testament how sometimes a woman is barren because of sin, because of something that's going on. One thing that happened, right, when Rachel, Leah, and Jacob were leaving Lebanon's land is what? Do any of you know? Go back and read the story. Rachel steals the idols from her father's house. She steals the gods from her father's house and takes them with her where her and Jacob are going to go back to the land where his brother Esau is. She steals from her father the idols, okay? She's serving other gods and she's bringing them along with her. And she hides them. She literally sits on them and she lies and she says that she's menstruating. So that way the men won't ask her to get off of her camel and find out that she's the one who's actually the thief. This woman was not a godly woman. This was not a woman of honor. This is a woman of dishonor. And through her, right, there is a curse that comes because her husband, Jacob, says that whoever has stolen these things shall die. Rachel ends up dying when she's conceiving Benjamin. Why? Because of her own sins, because of the judgment on the consequences of the things that she's done. So when we're reading scripture, it's important for us to understand the heart of God, understand what's really going on in this story, because God redeems. He redeems situations. He redeems people. He redeems mankind from our own sins. And that's what a majority of the Old Testament is showing us. It is showing us how God takes these terrible humans who are so disobedient to him and uses them for his glory despite their inability or desire to be right with him and follow in his way. So next time you're reading this story, take a glance at all of these different things and notice that this is not a love story that we should be idolizing, because this was not a story about how God brought two people together in love. It's a story about obsession. It's a story about fixation. It's a story about how a man was so obsessed with a woman that he neglected the woman he was with in order to pursue. In modern today, we would call that adultery. In today times, we would have called him a predator. In today times, we would have called him a bad husband. But yet, when we read through this story in the Bible, we idolize this as such a beautiful, loving story. It is not. Because if it was a beautiful, loving story, he would have noticed that Leah was the wife of promise, and he would have lavished her with the love that God had given him to lavish her with, as he continued to bless Leah over and over again, giving her children, showing Jacob, this is the woman whom the promise is coming from. Because Jacob knew the promise that God had given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he would make their descendants numerous. Okay? He understood that. And so in seeing that this woman was conceiving over and over again, that should have been enough of a sign for him that this woman was blessed of God and that God was using her to fulfill his promise. But instead, he neglects her because of his fixation and his obsession with another woman. So anyway, that's what I've been thinking about today. God bless you, and talk to you soon.